Okay, I think we're ready for our keynote speaker, and he's ready for you, and we are looking forward to this. Even though George Prescott Bush went to Rice, he has a lot of UVA connections, not least his Uncle Marvin. I taught him in the late 1970s. We won't talk about his performance, but he had a good time at the University of Virginia, and we are delighted to count him as a UVA alumnus, and we've had, I think, just about all the Bushes here at one time or another. So we are delighted to add one who you're going to be hearing about for many, many years to come, and goodness knows how many public offices. I just feel it coming. Now, George is the eldest of 3 children. You're at the age where being the eldest really isn't a lot of fun. It was great growing up, but you're the eldest of 3 children of former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who was endorsed this morning by Fred Barnes for president in 2016. And he also endorsed George for Texas Land Commissioner, although there is no commitment to run for any specific office. I think it's important to say that on the record. They just have to file early an intent of candidacy for something. And Texas elects everything clear down to dog catcher. So he's got a lot of choices coming up in 2014. In any event, George, of course, some of you may not know this. The 2 or 3 of you living under a rock may not know that he is the nephew of the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, and the grandson of the 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush. And I want you to tell us when you get up here, do you have to call them Mr. President, or do you get to call him Uncle George? And, I just wonder how that works, in these families. George co-founded Pennybacker Capital. Did I pronounce that correctly? Pennybacker Capital, which invests in and operates middle market, multifamily, retail, office, and industrial assets in sustainable growth markets with a primary focus on the 4 major Texas markets. Let's see, there's the connection there politically. He's been involved, though, with a wide variety of nonprofit organizations, ranging from leading a $30 million capital campaign for Big Brothers Big Sisters in North Texas to serving as chairman of the Dallas-Fort Worth Celebration of Reading, which raises $1 million annually for the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. And we've had her here a number of times as well. As I told you, she jumped down my throat once. I love her, though. She's a terrific person. He's currently spearheading an effort to expand upon the presence of a highly successful Dallas-based charter school, Uplift Education, in Tarrant County. And I have a sneaky suspicion you're going to be hearing a lot more about that and a lot of other things in his future. He's here to talk today not about his future, but about the future of the Republican Party as he sees it. Because as I suggested earlier this morning, the party that wins and has demographics on its side doesn't have a whole lot to worry about, at least in the short term. It's the party that loses that has to rethink what it's doing and has to figure out what it can do better and how it can appeal to a broader slice of Americans. And I think our keynote speaker today is well qualified to suggest some ways the Republican Party can improve and become a winning party again. So we are absolutely delighted to have here from Texas to Virginia, reminding you that Thomas Jefferson, you know this, Thomas Jefferson, in a famous letter, wrote about the great land of Tejas, T-E-J-A-S, and predicted that if we could get Texas to join the Union, it would become the largest, richest state in the Union. Thomas Jefferson, Nostradamus. He predicted this for Texas. Another tie between the two. So we will always welcome you in Virginia, and we welcome you today, George. Thank you for being here. That's a great thing.
Thank you, Larry. That's a tough act to follow. I mean, you're a true gift to the state of Virginia in the sense that you're able to provide such a great perspective on politics to younger Americans and really forcing people to look at the issues from both sides of the aisle. And your passion for education really shows through. I can't apologize on behalf of the Silver Fox. That's a little bit tougher act to follow as well, But Larry is correct. There is a Bush family tie to the grounds of the University of Virginia, first through my uncle Marvin Bush, who is a student here. My wife, Mandy Bush, is a practicing attorney in Fort Worth and recruits many of your law students to think about practicing in Texas. And I'm glad to join other members of the Bush clan to step foot on the great grounds. I'm learning some of the sayings. I guess you don't call freshmen, you call them first year, and so on and so forth. So I look forward to learning more about the beautiful grounds and more about your illustrious history today. But as Larry had mentioned, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Hispanic vote as it relates to U.S. politics. You know, it's interesting. I was kidding around with the moderator of the next panel about how this is so volatile. It seems like every other cycle Hispanics are overlooked, and then in other cycles it's the hottest topic. And right now within the Republican Party, whether you're visiting with grassroots activists or visiting with academics, this is the biggest issue that the party faces. And so this is a topic I've talked about for many years, and I'll talk a little bit about some of my political experiences relating to my family, and it's something that's very important to my family, starting with my grandfather, President George H.W. Bush, who created the Republican National Hispanic Assembly back in the 70s. So to briefly go over today's discussion, I've laid out an agenda here, and I'll try to capture as much of them as possible. I understand I have a few moments to talk with you, and then I'll open the floor to any questions you might have for me, and I'll try my best to address them. So, as you can imagine, being a member of the Bush family, you're pretty much you grow up around politics. My first political memory was when I was 3 years old in 1979, wearing a George Bush for President T-shirt in Memorial Park, Houston, when my grandfather announced he was running for president. So really, it's in my blood. It's part of who I am. In 1994, I'd really say that was my first political experience with my dad when he first ran for governor. And what's an interesting tidbit about Bush politicians that they've never won their first race, including my dad's in 1994. But a great case study in terms of Hispanic outreach, in the sense that he had won in 94, 98, and 2002 a majority of not only the Cuban Hispanic vote, but of the non-Cuban Hispanic vote in Florida. And that's me fishing with my dad actually this past summer, and that is a 16-pound largemouth. I got to brag a little bit. I also worked in the Bush-Cheney campaigns of 2000, 2004. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies we used in that campaign that I think were overlooked this time around and perhaps can be used down the road. But again, as we saw in Bush v. Gore in 2000, 2004, when my uncle established the high watermark among Republican national presidential candidates within the Hispanic community, that those were great case studies and great lessons in terms of moving forward as a party. Currently, I'm a businessman. I'm a humble businessman in the energy business. As was mentioned, I started a private equity fund about 7 years ago, but because of Dodd-Frank and the restrictions on political activities, I had to now reinvent myself in the oil and gas business, and also work with startup companies in early stage technologies, which has been exciting. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a military reservist, a husband, and yes, now I'm my wife and I are pregnant with our first. So it's an exciting time for me on a personal level. But I should state at the outset that this is not meant to be a partisan or a political speech. I'm not here to get votes. We've litigated, I think, sufficiently the issues this election cycle. I'm really here because I'm passionate about civic participation, about political involvement, and really view this almost as if we were examining a corpse and doing a post-death analysis of why the Republican Party lost the Hispanic vote and some of the trends that are taking place in the Hispanic community that will impact politics for the foreseeable future. So, in Texas, at least, since we are already a majority-minority state, and several other states, including California, it's really this huge demographic change that's taking place in our country is forcing a new dialogue with respect to race relations. In Texas, for example, we're already majority Hispanic independent school districts in Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, San Antonio. And African Americans and Asians will be part of this huge demographic tidal wave this century, in the 21st century. But Hispanics, I think, are going to redefine how we view our population in our country. And I'll show a few statistics to really kind of dive into the weeds on how this is going to take place. But and I'll talk about some of the organic growth. But what's interesting as well is that the baby boomer generation and their kids are having significantly less children than ever before. And so as the Anglo community in our country is having fewer children, the Hispanic community is well above the national average and well above the replacement rate. And so many people view, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but many people view the growth in the Hispanic community related exclusively to immigration, and it really is not. It's due to organic growth. We're having more children. So that's actually a photo of my brother Jeb's first daughter. He's participating on a personal level to this population growth. Hispanics currently, basically the key figure to recall is that Hispanics comprise 15%, according to the last Census Bureau's national population. But since 2000, Hispanics comprise over 50% of the nation's growth, and so already we're seeing astonishing organic growth within the community. In 1990, and I'll show this in a few visual depictions, but in 1990, most of the Hispanic community, in fact over 75%, really resided in counties that you would kind of expect in our countries, in throughout our country, that contains over 3,000 counties. But what's amazing is that in the last 10 years, and I'll show this in another map, that 80% of this growth just in the last generation has taken place in other aspects of the country that not a lot of people would think. So this is a map that depicts 1980, when the Census Bureau for the first time started asking, are you Hispanic, in terms of self-defining your ethnicity or your background. And so at the time, our country's population was 226 million, and 14.6 million were of Hispanic origin. As I mentioned at the outset, most of the population resided in the traditional areas you would expect: New York, South Florida, South Texas, and Southern California. So in 90, the population increases to 248, with now a larger percentage of 22 million Hispanics. And what you begin to see in this depiction really is a movement towards the Southwest. A fair amount of relocations are taking place from Southern California and Texas to areas like New Mexico and Colorado. Even in the Pacific Northwest, there's more concentration in the Northeast. Chicago's influence starts to increase as well. And then in 2000, at the turn of the century, 280 million in our country, 35 million Hispanics. You start to see the concentric circles expanding, especially in LA, Houston, DFW, even El Paso, Florida, and this eastern seaboard really start to see a concentration. And that's kind of the larger story of the 90s is that eastern seaboard coloration, if you will. It gets a lot thicker. And then based on the last Census Bureau, you start to see more distribution to areas like Pacific Northwest, Utah, even Idaho, Minnesota, Kansas City, St. Louis, I mean, you name it, Atlanta, throughout South Carolina, North Carolina. And so you still have growth in the core centers, but what the unwritten story is the distribution throughout the entire country. And this is a depiction based on the last census at a county level. And so this is gross numbers. So as you would imagine, Southern California is really the heavyweight. And this is really, I think, just the most important map that I'll show you. And this is the percentage of eligible Hispanic voters in our country in the various battleground states. And what you'll see is that in the southwest of our country, which is the fastest growing area of our country and growing influence, it's growing its influence politically, you're starting to see really more Hispanic growth. So the areas where you see like Texas, New Mexico, California, already over 25% of the state's population is of Hispanic origin. Florida, Arizona, Nevada, between 15 and 25%. And so really the states that both candidates, Romney and Obama, needed to win, really I would make the argument had to have been in the Southwest, in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, where Hispanic outreach is becoming even more essential. And really, I think going forward has to be institutionalized if the Republican Party is seeking to be more competitive. So taking a step back to 2008, I wanted to just highlight a few brief points. President Obama really did a great job in 2008 of reversing the trend, because as I mentioned in 2004, my uncle established the high water mark among Hispanic voters by achieving 44% of the vote. We all recall the divisive immigration debate in 2006, where in the midterms we took a step back and went down to 30%, and then President Obama won by a 2-to-1 margin against a pretty popular senator, I would argue, within the Hispanic community who advocated for immigration reform in the Senate in 2006. The Hispanic vote, and I'll show a map later showing, unfortunately, the lower voting participation rate within the community, but in 2008 it represented 9% of the total vote. And as it did in 2012, education, cost of living, jobs, and healthcare ranked as the top 4 issues, and I'll show another depiction that shows amazing correlation to 2012. And the reason why I bring that up is because everybody assumes that, as the average Hispanic voter, second, third generation especially, cares most about immigration, and all the data shows, this is based on the recent tabulation from the Pew Hispanic Research Center, which does phenomenal research on the preferences of Hispanic voters. But this is a depiction from 2008. Again, education, cost of living, jobs, healthcare being at the top, defying conventional wisdom that immigration defines the mindset of the average Hispanic voter. I don't have data that shows, and I didn't include in this presentation, but what's interesting is if you look at 2008-12, a lot of the same preferences and important issues mirror that of the Anglo community. So it's kitchen table issues that define a lot of the approaches of folks within the community. As I mentioned, there's unfortunate aspect, and what troubles me from a civic participation standpoint is a low voting participation rate within the community. This is a graph that shows the delta between eligible voters and actual voters. So there's a very large spread between, and it gets worse over time. This chart does not include the 12 figures, but what you'll see is that roughly half of eligible voters are actually voting. So looking at 12, as what's been highlighted, President Obama did a phenomenal job again by achieving 71% of the vote over Governor Romney's 29%. What was interesting, as opposed to a lot of other communities, they expressed growing satisfaction as to, on wrong track, right track questions in the polling data. They felt more confident about their personal finances than other communities. But again, and what's troubling is that they were less certain about voting in a lot of the polling data leading up to the election day. And as is being discussed in the media, and I don't want to overstate the importance, but it is becoming extremely important for the future of the Republican Party that the share of influence is starting to increase, as Hispanics now account for 11% of the eligible electorate, which is up from a little over 9% in 2008. So some highlights and takeaways from this cycle. What was interesting is that both conventions focused on and highlighted Hispanic achievement in the business world, the entertainment world, you name it. And it's becoming more of an important political strategy for both parties at the national level. As mentioned before, the top 4 issues among Hispanics were kitchen table, so healthcare, unemployment, economic growth, and the gap between rich and poor. And then Univision, I don't know if you guys recall, held the first, it was the first Spanish, even though it was held in English, the first Spanish-only television station to hold a national debate forum. And it was an interesting dialogue. I don't know if you guys had a chance to catch both discussions, but it really drilled down into the weeds on immigration policy. So other key takeaways are that since 1980, in the chart to the right shows the Hispanic breakdown from 1980 to this cycle, is that since 1980, no Republican has won nationally without winning at least 30% of the Hispanic vote. The highlighted victors on the right hand of the column kind of bear that out. Another interesting takeaway is that President Obama captured even a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote in Florida and Colorado. I think a lot of folks within the party assumed that younger people and that minorities wouldn't come out in the same level of inspiration that was achieved in '08, and yet conventional wisdom was defied. What was interesting as well is that he won substantially large margins in Wisconsin, North Carolina, here in the state of Virginia, and in Ohio, in states where really there wasn't as much of a concentrated effort on Hispanic outreach. And so, what was interesting as well is that in those states that I mentioned, he would have won those states regardless of, the Hispanic vote. The margins were so large, but in the states that he needed the majorities, which were in that earlier map that I showed you, so Nevada, Florida, New Mexico, Colorado, he did a great job and got the needed majorities to win those states. The purpose of this graph really is just to show the states that have a higher level of battleground states, the 9 states that I guess are defined as battleground states that have a larger percentage of Hispanic voters. My personal viewpoint is that Governor Romney lost the opportunity to take the advantage of the discussion on immigration. This summer, you guys may have recalled the president instituting by executive order deferred action for students seeking to obtain an education in our country. And I think prior to that, there was an opportunity for the governor to present a comprehensive proposal that at the very least may not have been passed or administered by Congress, but at the very least would have been something for his surrogates, including myself and others, to market more effectively, both in Spanish and English. There really wasn't as much detail and as much meat that we needed that presents our party in a way that provides hope and an image that we're a party of opportunity as opposed to a party of restriction. And a lot of this data is just coming in after Election Day, but there's a study that I read this morning that showed that the president outspent Governor Romney on Spanish TV, radio, and overall staff by a factor of two times, and his messaging online was roughly about the same factor. So clearly, from day one, it was more of a concentrated effort on their side. So I'll talk a little bit about just at a high level some other issues that bear noting, I think, within the community that might be favorable to the Republican Party down the road. First is the entrepreneurial aspect of the community. I being an example that there's numerous studies that show that Hispanics are more likely to start their own business than other communities. In Texas, for example, there are over 150,000 small businesses owned by Hispanics. And so traditionally, the Republican Party has kind of defined itself as the party of business. That would be an opportunity to find connectivity with the Hispanic demographic. Faith, it's a very religious community. The common conception is that we're exclusively Catholic. Yes, we're disproportionately Catholic. We're, as I mentioned before, 15% of the total national population, but represent over a third of all Catholics in the U.S. We're very overt with our faith. 2 out of 3 Hispanics attend service in Spanish with Hispanic clergy, and a majority of us pray at least once a day. And I'll talk a little bit about it later, but one of the other more interesting dynamics taking place in the Hispanic faith dynamic is that we're becoming more evangelical. The largest percentage growth of evangelicals in our country are of Hispanic origin. So again, so the Republican Party's conservative viewpoints on social questions can be a natural alliance. Entertainment, this is less political, but one statistic I'll mention is that 40% of all new televisions being purchased in the U.S. are being purchased by Hispanics, which is pretty amazing. Now, majority are receiving news increasingly in English, but major Spanish-only networks in markets like Miami, LA, Houston, Dallas are now outcompeting English-speaking local channels. And so it's a pretty interesting thing that's taking place. So changes for America. Current projections show that Hispanics will be 1 out of 3 Americans by 2050. And that I think it goes without saying that Hispanics are really just beginning to flex their political muscles. There's 1,000 elected representatives at the local, county, and state level, as reported by NALEO recently. But that number, I think, is going to increase with time. And I think in many of our lifetimes we'll see the first Hispanic president. And I think one unwritten story that's not even actually discussed at all by the mainstream media is the growth of the evangelical faith within these. I think it's going to have a lot of impact, not only on our country and a societal level, but politically. So just some final takeaways from the 2012 election, the spirit of bipartisanship. I have my photo there of the Democratic donkey and the Republican elephant. Is the influence of money. I think most people, especially here in Virginia, were exposed to the massive amounts of advertising. With the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United, it is estimated that over $6 billion was expended from the national level to the local level. To really underscore the point of a polarized election, 10 counties pretty much were the barometers of who was elected president, including in states like Virginia. But Ohio and Florida really are important for the party moving forward. No Republican nominee has won in modern American history without winning 2 of the 3 following states, Ohio, Florida, or Pennsylvania. And now Virginia being arguably a purple state, it becomes the electoral map now is definitely expanding. So these were the final results. Again, my takeaway from the map is a reallocation of attention to the Southwest. The fact that Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, go for the president, I think underscores the importance of refocusing on the Southwest. There was an allocation, I thought, in my mind, towards states in the industrial Midwest, which proved to be problematic. I'll just show some final graphs leading up to Election Day in the 3 battleground states that I mentioned that pretty much turned the election. So in Florida, a lot of this you'll see, I think, really underscores the point of the impact that Sandy had leading up to Election Day and the attack in Libya, which, from a political scientist standpoint, usually results in a rally around the flag effect, which favors incumbents leading up to Election Day. And so in Florida, you'll see that blue spike lead up after that. What's interesting is in Florida, this is real clear politics data. It shows Romney winning by 1.5 points, and as we know, the president picked it up by roughly 80 basis points. And then in Virginia, extremely tight. This is definitely the eye of the political storm, and really underscores the tightness of that race. And then finally in Ohio, and it really, I think and I'll visit with this on the last map, but the Murdoch and the Aiken statements really also had impact right around that time, about 2 weeks leading up to Election Day. It not only affected the Senate races in those respective states, but I think it really had some impact on swing in independent voters, and especially among female voters, where the gender gap was the widest in recent memory. So this was the final Senate map. This is probably the biggest disappointment for Republicans going into the cycle. We were expected to really take the majority. Again, losing Missouri, Indiana was not part of the calculus. Connie Mack was a very attractive candidate in Florida. Not to mention, you had tight races in Connecticut, Massachusetts that could have easily gone, either way. Tommy Thompson was a very, very attractive candidate in Wisconsin. So we'll see. There's definitely folks within the party that are hitting the panic button, but as we know in politics, things move cyclically, and last-minute statements certainly have some impact. So hook 'em horns. I don't know if that was offending sensibilities. Stepping on the grounds of the University of Virginia. That's a photo taken before opening game this season. But I'd love to address any questions you may have. I had some other information to show you, but I wanted to be brief in my remarks and really make this conversational and open it up to any thoughts you may have for me. Thank you again.
You can line up at the mics, and somebody already has. Or you can just raise your hand.
My name is Ed Malay, and I'm a first-generation American, brung up, as we say in New York City, among immigrant community. And I'm wondering whether there's something distinctive about the Hispanic immigration. I mean, I think we're at a point that the people I knew that I was brought up with, and so I no longer think of themselves as Italian voters or German voters or so on, or Irish voters even. I guess when John Kennedy came along, that might have been a little different. But and I'm wondering whether there's something. That's part of my question. The other question is how much of an intermarriage phenomenon is going on in the Hispanic community, and what impact is that going to have in terms of how they think about themselves, identify themselves culturally? Thank you, sir.
Great question. I think from a self-identification standpoint, a lot of the data and anecdotally just shows that when Hispanics typically are here for second, third generations, that there's less of an identification based on ethnic lines. However, for census purposes, there's usually the requirement to self-identify. And so I think many, again, going back to the original point, that many in my generation really don't view themselves as Hispanic, really just view ourselves as American with Hispanic origin. So I'm a firm believer, on a percentage basis, this immigration wave that we're seeing really doesn't match the likes of what we saw earlier in the 20th century, in the 20s. And so I think it's just a natural and what makes our country great is that there's, yes, for lack of a better term, an Americanization of these immigrants, but our great country inherits some of the traits that they bring from their countries of origin, which I think is what makes us the greatest country that the world's ever known. With respect to intermarriage, that is a huge trend that's taking place. I'll borrow that idea and actually incorporate it in my next talk, but it's increasingly taking place. I happen to be married to the first Anglo-gay girl that I ever dated. Growing up in Miami, I dated pretty much only Hispanic girls, and I don't really view people based on race or origin. I just happen to fall in love, and that's increasingly taking place among second and third generation. So, and that's also, I think, speaking to the growth of the use of English within the Hispanic community. I mean, it's now almost becoming the case that if you're second generation or beyond, it's the only language you're speaking. Many of my friends don't know a word of Spanish that are of Hispanic origin. So it's that's another trend that's taking place. But I appreciate the question.
My name is Mike McCory. I live here in Charlottesville. And there's an individual in the first two panels that was never mentioned. His name, if I'm pronouncing it right, is Jim Messina, who ran Obama's campaign. I think he was appointed by Obama 3 years ago this coming Christmas. My question is, depending on who you talk to and who you listen to, this guy ran an amazing campaign for Obama using computer technology, data mining, etc. I'd be wondering what your comments were about him, and given the future, does the Republican Party need somebody like this gentleman? Thank you.
Very good question. Yeah, that's another, I think, general trend, and there's a fascinating article written about him in Time recently. But this is an issue that we try to raise. I'm involved with an organization called MAFPAC, which is a conservative young professionals group that really looked in the data in '08 and how we lost. I mean, I think it's important to understand how you lose so that you can win. And one of the biggest takeaways is that President Obama outspent Senator McCain, I believe, 100-1 in terms of total resources devoted to online penetration. In terms of staff, it was even a larger factor. I mean, I was receiving emails and texts from the Obama campaign in '08 leading up to Election Day. What's disturbing is that we didn't really take that lesson and take it to heart. Messina took it to the next level in terms of micro-targeting. The algorithms available through Facebook, Twitter, other social media platforms, it's really innovative. And when you look at our generation, I mean, I think overwhelming majority receive their news online. And if I think any campaign, whether you're running for dog catcher or in any office, it has to be part and parcel with your strategy. Without it, you're just not going to be able to reach younger voters. And he did it in a way that was I think will be written about in the over the course of the long term. It's really innovative what they've done, and hopefully we can steal a page from the playbook.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bush. My name is Alex Rando. I have a quick question. Do you believe that if Marco Rubio was the choice of VP for Governor Romney, that Governor Romney would have received more of the Hispanic vote? And do you think he would have received enough to possibly even win the election? Thank you.
Very good question. That's maybe top 3 either comment or question that I'm hearing in the last few weeks. I think he definitely would have had some impact, especially in Florida. What's interesting, his numbers pulled out better than Governor Romney and Connie Mack leading up to Election Day. So bringing Florida into the column would have helped, but the margin was so large that you'd really have to look at Pennsylvania, Ohio, stealing Iowa, or combining some western states to make it happen. And I'm just not sure what his appeal would have been in terms of that. I think what was interesting about the Paul Ryan selection, from my generation's perspective at least, people were excited about the pick because he's willing to risk his entire political capital to say we need to reform entitlements, otherwise, the size of the debt is just unsustainable. And I think a lot of people, whether you look at the military or applications to public service among our generation, you'll see that we're willing to sacrifice. I mean, we serviced two wars, completely voluntary. So, and I think we're smart. We understand the issues. We understand what's at stake, and so we're willing to buy on with some form of reform. But that entitlement discussion never really took place. But I think Rubio right now is the front runner for 16. He I don't know if you guys have ever met with him or seen him talk, but he is next generation. He is unbelievable. I think really highly of him. And he brings a different demographic. Now, a lot of naysayers say, well, he can't get the Mexican American vote because he's Cuban American. But and there are some differences among our various nations of origin. I think you guys saw in my introduction slide, literally 20 different countries are represented in our country. That certainly there are differences, but he speaks to the immigrant story in a way that's it's very appealing, very powerful. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's the nominee in 4 years.
Hi, my name is Tom Rando. As a younger Republican leader, what is the current thinking in terms of educating the electorate in terms of the more sophisticated ideas of the world being flat and that you really have to get out there and outsource jobs to get the best price in order to compete in the world, and things like Obamacare and the relationship to supply and demand and how that's going to affect medical services and things like that. So how do you see us getting to the younger people and even the older people, but these more sophisticated ideas that they may not have come up in college or in school?
Well, I think that's one point I'll make is that I don't know what the current composition of Congress is, but very few come from a business background. And I think we need more, whether it be Republican or Democrat, that come from that entrepreneurial background and understanding the competitive nature in which we're waging war of business, if you will, internationally. Especially, I'm in the energy business, and you see Chinese in the oil patch in West Texas bidding on mineral rights, and being a military veteran in Afghanistan, seeing and hearing from my buddies in Iraq that you have Chinese and Russians bidding on mineral rights in areas not only like Iraq but throughout the world. So, but I think through the education process, I think our generation is tracking these issues. I was visiting with the director of career services here at University of Virginia, and I think what's interesting about the education debate is that post-secondary education is still the envy of the world here in the U.S. The wealthy of the world still send their kids to our colleges because we're still the best, but K to 12 we're underperforming, and we've got to right that ship, I think, and through that we'll do a better job of transitioning. But part of the biggest step that we need to make is making skills relevant for the jobs of the future, so that when a child leaves from high school, they have the ability to either take a job there or show up to class prepared. One of the biggest issues we're facing in Texas is the amount of the largest growth in our curriculum are remedial classes at community colleges and four-year institutions, because we have to start over again with kids that are coming onto campus. And so that's I think a big issue, and your question I think speaks to that.
Thank you again for coming, Mr. Bush. My name is Edward. I'm a fourth-year politics student here at the University of Virginia. My question is, a lot of people are speculating that your father may run in 2016. Can you give us a little insight to his plans in a few years?
I wish I had some secret intel. No, I've, along with a lot of other Republicans, really approached him for this cycle, to be honest. He's a very thoughtful man. I think he enjoys his role in being, as I view it, a voice of reason within the Republican Party, and really being at the forefront of education reform and immigration reform, which are the two biggest issues that I think our party needs to step up and take a leadership role on. And I think he's in an interesting role in an interesting time in our country's history and our party's history that allows him to be an elder statesman. And there's ways to influence, I think, politics without actually having to be an elected official, which I think he's enjoying. He, 1980, worked hard for my grandfather and his races. He's been at politics for over 30 years, running from Bush v. Gore to, losing in '94. And, we'll see where the future takes him. But I think he enjoys his role, loves business, and helping out behind the scenes, maybe being Marco's senior advisor. We'll see.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, you got one more question? One more.
I'm George Loper in Virginia. On your chart, it looked like education is a very important issue for Latinos and everybody. I guess I wonder how you conceive of paying for the kind of education we need for K through 12 to move the country forward.
Very good question. It's the biggest long-term crisis that at least I think the state of Texas faces. We currently are encountering a $20 billion shortfall, though we run on a biannual basis, so that number is larger than you would imagine on an annual basis. But I actually just drove down from D.C., and I think Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan puts it best in saying that the resources are there. We spend more per pupil than any other country in the industrialized world, yet our outcomes do not match where our expectations are. So from my point of view, I think it's an accountability issue. So that starts with understanding that teachers are being relied upon to solve our education crisis. When we're asking them to parent children, we're asking them to deal with, especially in Texas, kids that don't have English as their predominant language. So reforming education. I happen to be on the board of Uplift Education. 80% of our kids are of minority background. 60% qualify at the poverty rate. Yet 100% of our students, not one kid has come through our system and not graduated from high school. Now, not all of them go on to get a 4-year college degree, and we're working on the numbers there, but we're roughly over 80% of our kids go on. And there's no secret sauce. We require a longer school day. So we're a public charter school system. We're not a private system. So we have to operate under the guidelines of Fort Worth Independent School District or DISD or HISD. But we require more time in the classroom. We can hire and fire our teachers, but we pay them for performance. So if they take, whether it's a first-year teacher or a 20-year teacher, they take an underperforming class of kids that have, say, low IQ levels or prior underperformance on standardized examinations and demonstrate some level of improvement, they should be rewarded for that. So we work harder, and we expect more from our students. Our teachers, basically advertise their classroom based on their alma mater, which is really cool. So the expectation is that you're going to college, regardless of your background and your history. So it's the biggest challenge we face. I could give another hour-long presentation on it, but I would say in Texas at least we're, from an SAT standpoint, we're 49th in the country on verbal and 47th in math. Yet we spend roughly where I think we're 22nd in the country in spending. So to me, it's less of a finance issue, though. We're going to have to cut back, and teachers are going to have to be laid off, at least in our state. But with a reallocation of resources, a changing in accountability, and holding administrators accountable, their salaries have increased exponentially, in the last generation, and yet teacher salaries barely keep pace with inflation. There's a problem there, and it's up to public officials, hopefully, to hold them accountable and making sure that the kids in whatever zip code perform well. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Awesome. All right.
George, thank you very much. That was a very substantive presentation. I learned a lot from it, and I hope we can get a copy of your PowerPoint. We'll put it on our website. And we learned a lot about the Latino vote. We thank you for that. You also made some news. I mean, you made some news. I don't know whether the reporters here were listening, but a lot of talk about another Bush running for president. I didn't hear that. I heard this other guy from Florida as the more likely candidate. But we won't hold you to that. We know you don't speak for that other Bush. But the third thing, the concluding thing, is the next Bush who's president could be with us. I think it's entirely possible. So we will look forward to that. And we now that you've made it to the University of Virginia, and really this is the high point of your life. You've made it here to the University of Virginia now. No insult to Rice over here. But now that you've made it here, don't be a stranger. Come back to the grounds often, and we'll teach you even more of our lingo. Thank you so much for being with us, George.